Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. Once again, my computer hanged when I went to go live a couple of minutes ago, or a minute ago. So I had to start again. So those people who were waiting, who are in the chat already, they'll have to migrate here. I'm going to begin today by speaking about the so-called special relationship. I'm going to read from the Wikipedia entry. The special relationship is an unofficial term that is often used to describe the political, diplomatic, cultural, economic, military, and historic relations between the United Kingdom and the United States or its political leaders. The term first came into popular usage after it was used in a 1946 speech by former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Both nations have been close allies during many conflicts in the 20th and 21st century, including World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Cold War, the Gulf War, and the War on Terror. Although both governments also have close relationships with many other nations, the level of cooperation between the UK and the US in trade and commerce, military planning, execution of military operations, nuclear weapons technology, and intelligence sharing has been described as unparalleled among major world powers. The close relationships between British and American heads of government, such as Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, as well as between Tony Blair and both Bill Clinton and George W. Bush, have been noted. At the diplomatic level, characteristics include recurring public representations of the relationship as special, frequent and high-profile political visits, and extensive information exchange at the diplomatic world level. Some critics deny the existence of a special relationship and call it a myth. Former U.S. President Barack Obama considered German Chancellor Angela Merkel to be his closest international partner and said that the U.K. would be at the, quote, back of the queue, unquote, in any trade deal with the U.S. if it left the European Union. And he accused British Prime Minister David Cameron of being distracted by a range of things during the 2011 military intervention in Libya. During the 1956 Suez Crisis, U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower threatened to revoke IMF loans because of Britain's invasion of Egypt to recapture the Suez Canal. In the 1960s, British Prime Minister Harold Wilson rebuffed U.S. President Lyndon Johnson's request to employ British troops in the Vietnam War. British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher also privately opposed the 1983 U.S. invasion of Grenada, and U.S. President Reagan unsuccessfully pressured against the 1982 Falklands War. I'm one of those people who believes that the special relationship is a myth, and we see another example of it today. Special relationship is the United States says jump, and Britain says how high. This is from the Daily Mail yesterday. Joe Biden delivers stern rebuke to Boris Johnson for inflaming tensions in Northern Ireland and imperiling peace process over a UK stance on EU sausage war as president lands in Britain for G7 summit. Joe Biden accused Boris Johnson of inflaming tensions when he meets the prime minister today. He is tipped to set up a new Atlantic charter. But the U.S. president has ordered his officials to issue a rare diplomatic rebuke to the British government. Yael Lempert, charge d'affaires at the U.S. Embassy in London, said the UK's stance was imperiling the peace process. Rebuke came as crunch talks between Britain and Brussels over sausage imports failed to make breakthrough. Well, yes, the peace process. What does the peace process mean? It means handing over Northern Ireland or Ulster to the Republic of Ireland and putting the whole of Ireland under the control of Sinn Féin, which is the political arm of the murderous Irish Republican Army. Why would the United States have an interest in this question? Well, because of the numerous Irish Americans in the United States of America who hate Britain with a passion for colonial reasons. I suppose it's arguable that Barack Obama hated Britain with a passion for colonial reasons as well, given that his father was from Kenya. No, but for decades now, the United States has been intervening rather bluntly in the internal affairs of the United Kingdom and coming down very strongly on the side of the IRA, looking the other way when an organization in the United States called NORAID raised funds for the Irish Republican Army. Oh, they didn't say that's what it was for. It was for humanitarian purposes, but everyone knows it was a fundraising arm in the United States for the Irish Republican Army. This is Joe Biden's idea of diplomacy, is to issue a very serious diplomatic rebuke just before the beginning of talks with the Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Here's another story from today's Daily Mail. Joe and Jill Biden dressed down into jeans and sneakers for a quiet drink outside their Cornwall hotel after meeting Boris and Kerry Johnson, cracking jokes about marriage and reaffirming the special relationship. The pair walked to the outdoor seating area of the Tregenna Castle Hotel in St. Ives. To the shock of guests, they unwound after Johnson downplayed their differences and emphasized the, quote, special relationship. We reaffirm the special relationship. It's not said lightly, the special relationship between our people, Biden said. So what exactly happened? Here's another story from the London Times. The Times disclosed today that Yael Lempert, America's most senior diplomat in Britain, told Lord Frost, the Brexit minister, that the government was inflaming tensions in Ireland and Europe with its opposition to checks at Northern Irish ports. Here is a story from, or an opinion piece from the London Telegraph, Niall Gardner. Joe Biden should keep his sneering anti-British, anti-Brexit views to himself. Before insulting the Prime Minister, the President should remember that people in the UK voted to leave the EU and take back control. The revelation that the Biden administration issued a démarche, or diplomatic dressing down, to the British government last week over its handling of the Northern Ireland border should cause outrage in Britain. This is the kind of treatment that is normally dished out to enemies of the United States, such as Russia, and hardly ever issued against a close ally. As both the Telegraph and the Times have reported, Biden's most senior diplomat in London delivered a firm rebuke June 3rd on behalf of the president to Brexit Minister Lord Frost, declaring that Britain's stance on the Northern Ireland Protocol was jeopardizing the future of the Northern Ireland peace process. To make matters even worse, Yael Lempert, Washington's chargé d'affaires in London, issued a thinly veiled warning linking the prospect of a US-UK free trade deal with White House demands for the UK to follow the European Union's directives on agricultural standards. So Britain thought it was out. Joe Biden is saying, no, you're in forever. It was Britain being fiddled about by the European Union over agriculture, which was one of the main causes of Brexit. But for some reason, the American deep state has decided that, yes, the EU must maintain agricultural supremacy over Britain. Gardner continues, in many respects, this is Joe Biden's back of the queue moment. Barack Obama's now infamous anti-Brexit intervention didn't go well back in 2016. And threats like this will always backfire with the British people, who don't appreciate being lectured to by US presidents, not least one who displays his anti-British sentiments on his sleeve. Unlike Obama, however, who was encouraged to intervene ahead of the Brexit referendum by then Prime Minister David Cameron, Biden didn't act at the prodding of Downing Street. Biden's Northern Ireland warning was a political cruise missile strike aimed directly at Boris Johnson and his Conservative government, with the intention of forcing a change in British policy. As a staunch Irish nationalist, Biden has frequently been critical of Great Britain over Northern Ireland, and now that he is president, sees an opportunity to take it to task. There is no love lost between Biden's team, many of whom served in the Obama administration, and Boris Johnson. Some of Biden's extremely sensitive aides are still unhappy with the former mayor of London for his sharp criticism of Obama over the removal of the Winston Churchill bust from the Oval Office back in 2009. They also intensely dislike Brexit and Johnson's formerly close partnership with the Trump presidency. In addition, they've been angered by the strong stance of the British government in the culture wars, with its firm rejection of the kind of woke liberal agenda that is now central to the thinking of the Biden operation. Indeed, on many issues, the US and British governments are worlds apart, and Johnson has been forced to work with the most left-wing US presidency in American history. The arrogance of the Biden administration ahead of the G7 meeting in Cornwall has been nothing short of breathtaking. This is no way to treat America's closest friend and ally. The British people didn't vote for Joe Biden and the Democrats. They voted for Brexit and Boris Johnson's Conservatives. They voted to leave the EU and take back control of Britain's destiny. They don't need to be lectured by a US president who, as a senator, adopted a sympathetic stance towards the Irish Republican Army and opposed the extradition of Irish terrorist suspects to face trial in the United Kingdom. And here is an allied story, or a similar story, again from the Telegraph, Patrick Sawyer, from November of last year. Joe Biden angered British government over U.S. visa for Gerry Adams. Biden argued that allowing Adams to visit the U.S. would draw him deeper into the peace process and distance him from the armed struggle. Joe Biden was among a group of U.S. politicians who angered John Major's conservative government when he argued publicly for Gerry Adams to be allowed into the United States. The then senator was among a group of Democratic politicians who worked to convince President Clinton to grant Adams, the then president of Sinn Féin, the political wing of the IRA, a visa in 1994. Biden argued that allowing Adams to visit the U.S. would draw him deeper in the peace process. But sources have revealed that his efforts infuriated Major's government, which did not want the Sinn Féin leader to enjoy the prestige and credibility which would accompany such a visit. Initially wary of granting him a visa, the U.S. government changed its approach days before the visit was due, after Adams made remarks about ending violence in a meeting with American diplomats in Belfast. During the visit to New York, Adams enjoyed a hero's welcome, boosting his profile and standing in the large and influential Irish American community. A senior UK diplomatic source told The Telegraph Joe Biden did encourage President Clinton to ignore British advice and get Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness to the U.S. It wasn't really what we thought was helpful at the time. Martin McGuinness was the IRA leader who boasted to Patrick Lilley, a former conservative cabinet minister, of his murder of Catholic civilians, including women who were deemed to be too close to the British government. This has happened amongst both Democratic and Republican presidents, that in order to suck up to the Irish American vote, let's bring IRA murderers to the White House on St. Patrick's Day in order to suck up to them. Now, exactly what the Irish Americans in America, or the Irish Canadians in Canada, they have a historical grievance with Great Britain. Well, I could play this game too if I wanted to. The Grace family was one of the largest land-owning families in Ireland, but was successively reduced under Elizabeth Cromwell and then William of Orange. Am I supposed to be weeping bitter tears and shaking my fist at Great Britain because of confiscations that happened hundreds of years ago? Of course, it's deeply ironic that the Irish government today apparently intends to turn Ireland into a province of Nigeria, that it remains anti-British, but is allowing itself to be swamped by rebarbative foreigners. Let's see if anyone migrated to the chat with me. There we go. Enoch Powell. Enoch Powell warned for decades what the U.S. plan was, and he wasn't listened to. Recently, well, not recently, going back a long way, Peter Hitchens has been waving that torch. He doesn't mention Enoch Powell in this regard, as far as I know, because of some dispute that he has with the late Mr. Powell over Powell's speech in Birmingham in 1968. Hitchens thought it was, I don't know, precipitous or some such. Hello to Palcasso 88, a Star Rover, a Pitsky, random number generator. KMG says, KMG, you got to keep putting out those, putting out those decoys. I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do about it. I set the program to start, and then I click the button, and sometimes it just hangs. So I have to go back and start again. I don't know. Hello to Anne Rundan and William Hicks. I'm going to get to Peter Hitchens. Actually, let's get to him right now. He's written any number of columns about this. Here's one from 2009. When I lived in Washington, D.C., I tried for many months to find the famous special relationship, which I had heard so much about back home. It was not there. I could find nobody, including our then ambassador, who admitted its existence. What was more, I noticed that my country was pretty unloved in the American capital, despite the increasingly shabby and embarrassing Winston Churchill and/or Margaret Thatcher cults common among a certain type of American, actually neoconservatives they're called. In fact, I was later able to witness at very close quarters the complete diplomatic defeat of Britain in Washington by the tiny Irish embassy. Bear in mind here that the British Embassy on Massachusetts Avenue is a relic of imperial grandeur, both magnificent and huge. The ambassador's residence, a fine piece of Lutyens in a sort of semi-country house style, is rather a melancholy reminder that we were once great. The nearby embassy buildings, though architecturally frightful, are large and suggest correctly that Britain maintains a very large staff here, much of it devoted to military and intelligence cooperation or attempts at cooperation. And yet during 1994 and 95, this whole apparatus knew less about the White House and its intentions than the Irish, and was quite unable to win a diplomatic battle over what amounted to American recognition of the provisional IRA as a negotiating partner. I was once phoned up by a White House official who had become aware I was writing uncomplimentary articles about this. She wanted to brief me into softening my views, Hitchens writes, but she wrecked the whole thing by comparing Bill Clinton's intervention on the side of Jerry Adams with his involvement in Yugoslavia. So, I said to her, you regard Britain, your wartime ally, a sovereign democracy with 1,000 years of history, the origin of your own constitution, as the equivalent of Serbia? She went very quiet, because in fact that is exactly how the White House then regarded Britain, and I should think it is pretty much as the White House regards us now. Then he goes on to talk about the Falklands War, and Reagan was initially, how shall I say, ambiguous about this, although Alexander Haig, the Secretary of State, and that frightful woman, Jean Kirkpatrick, who was American ambassador to the United Nations, and the queen of the neocons, were openly calling for the United States to take the side of Argentina over its seizure of the Falkland Islands. It's been clear for ages, Hitchens writes, in its desire to have a single phone number when dealing with what some Americans refer to as Europe. The U.S. State Department has been anxious to cram Britain into a European superstate. In fact, it's often been suggested that the CIA has been involved in various backstairs pro-EU campaigns in the past. I've never been quite sure how the various neoconservative admirers of the USA, Eurosceptics to a man, cope with Washington's strong pro-Brussels policies. I expect they just ignore them. And he goes on to talk about American schoolbook history, full of dubious stuff about British oppression of the colonists. And he says, more recently, it was our ally, the USA, which ended British naval supremacy and in effect put a stop to our Asian empire with the 1922 Washington Naval Treaty. This was in truth the moment at which the British Empire was finished, though we had to go through several defeats before we believed it. And then, of course, there was the desperate indebtedness of Britain to the USA after the Second World War, which enabled Washington to demand the dismantling of the empire in return to aid. Not to mention Suez, where the U.S. Sixth Fleet actively harassed British warships on their way to Egypt, and President Eisenhower threatened us with bankruptcy if we didn't withdraw. Well, that's all right. Why should it be otherwise? America's accession to the topmost rank could only have come at our expense. America's interests are different from ours. Nations don't have eternal friendships, as Palmerston long ago pointed out. And yet the pretense continues. I guess people are sentimental. Even people who claim to be hard-headed, most of them are sentimentalists. Peter Hitchens wrote in April 2016, "Now will we grasp that the United States is not our friend, but a foreign country whose interests are often different from ours. Obama's blatant intervention in our internal affairs is not a sudden breach of a soppy special relationship. The USA's only real special relationship is with Saudi Arabia, a 70-year-old hard pact of oil, money, and power, welded together with such cynicism it ought to make us gasp." Yes, I should have thought that this would be fairly obvious, but apparently it isn't. Hitchens continues, "In the blackest months of the Second World War, just after the fall of France, the U.S. Congress demanded almost every penny we owned before it would authorize the famous Lend-Lease program. Secret convoys of Royal Navy warships carried our reserves of gold bullion, estimated to have been worth 26 billion pounds in today's values, across the Atlantic, mostly never to return. Billions in negotiable securities went the same way, and British assets in the USA were sold off at absurdly low prices. I don't blame the Americans for this. In 1934, Britain had defaulted on her giant First World War debt to the USA. This is now worth up to 225 billion pounds in today's money, depending on how you calculate inflation." So let's go back to the chat again. Enoch Powell hated the United States. I don't know that he hated the United States. He hated the idea that there was some sort of special relationship when he could see how one-sided it was. He also hated the hypocrisy of the foreign policy, supposedly anti-colonialist foreign policy, whereas American foreign policy since the Second World War has been imperialist in everything but name. I didn't forget the other stream. No. Sorry about that. But sometimes this happens. Don't cry for me, Argentina, says Don Willis. Star Rover says Marshall Plan was intended to Americanize Europe. Reagan was ambivalent about the Falklands, says Palcaso 88, because Argentina gave lots of money to the Contras. Brit history is as dirty as anyone, says Birkin Sultanov. I'm sure that is true. Okay. Random number generator says, as someone with utmost respect for my Southern blue-collar ancestors, I could say without a date. Oh, okay. Doesn't like the U.S. anymore. KMG, have you read White Shift by Eric Kaufman, says Dionysus. Yes, I have. I reviewed it on Luke Ford's when I was on Luke Ford's White Stream. It's a curious book because Kaufman, who's of mixed racial ancestry himself, essentially argues that white people are going to disappear. But maybe if we play it right, we can make the best of our disappearance. It is really rather a shocking proposition, but I suppose Kaufman could be seen as something as an optimist. And I'm going to be talking about that shortly. Okay. Well, in other British American news, again this is from Dan Wooden at the Daily Mail. So it was an American who canceled our Queen at Oxford University. Should we be surprised? Hell no. This was always the risk of the corrosive narrative spread by Harry and Meghan's diehard Yank supporters like Oprah Winfrey and Gayle King, who seem cravenly obsessed with linking the modern-day royal family to racism without any evidence to back up such claims. Computer science lecturer Matthew Katzman, who tabled the motion to remove the unwelcoming portrait of the Queen from Magdalen's middle common room, is the epitome of U.S. privilege. The 25-year-old is the son of a lawyer who lives in a £4 million mansion in Washington, D.C. The Mail Online today revealed that he attended a £33,000 posh college attended by the Obama's daughters and Chelsea Clinton, then went to Stanford before arriving at Oxford to study for a PhD in complexity theory. This fellow argued that given how international Britain is today and Oxford is today, that it was wrong, unwelcoming to have a picture of the Queen in the common room of Magdalen College, Oxford, given that the only reason that these Black and Asian students are at Oxford University is because of the British Empire. This is a typical fatuous offering. Wooten writes, the MCR decided the print based on a 1952 photo showing the Queen with a youthful glow in a white gown and blue sash ahead of her coronation was unwelcoming because the monarch represents recent colonial history. Yes, the recent colonial history of the British Empire giving all its colonial possessions freedom. Yeah, that recent colonial history. Yes, let's see. Would this rabble-rouser disrespect his own country like this? I highly doubt it. His social media profile is full of pictures of him proudly flying the stars and stripes. But that's the real problem with this breed of identity politics, where everything is about virtue signaling rather than facts on the ground. And we have well, let's see. We have some African in Britain railing against the Queen for a similar reason. Why this fellow is in Britain is an interesting question. I want to talk now about who the Conservatives. I don't know that they call themselves conservatives, but they are the last liberals, the fag end of liberalism. They are detested by the progressives, who have replaced the liberals. But I'm thinking of a publication, a journal called Quillette, which I see articles in it from time to time. And they seem to be intelligent and thoughtful, but useless, ultimately. Claire Lehman is the editor of Quillette. She is a clever woman and an attractive one, but she is rather like Ross Douthat. She thinks that things are moving too fast. Things are being said which shouldn't be said. She tweets, James Lindsay is now peddling white genocide theory, implying that a genocide against whites in the U.S. is imminent and has the potential to inspire racist violence. Such comments are extreme, reckless, and irresponsible. They should be denounced. Opposition to wokeness and critical race theory is one thing. Suggesting that the majority racial group in the U.S. is on the verge of being slaughtered is another. If a sharp line is not drawn between the two, they will become conflated by progressives to discredit anti-CRT efforts. Oh, yes, we have to worry about what the progressives think, because the progressives are always fair and disinterested. Are they? They're going to be denouncing us regardless of what we do, regardless of how much we grovel. And in fact, the more we grovel, the more we are denounced. Lehman continues, and possible maniacs, extremists, people who have become insane via overexposure to the internet may also feel inspired, emboldened, and validated to commit terrorist violence. James Lindsay needs to stop now. Terrorist violence of any kind is going to be blamed on us, regardless of whether it has anything to do with us. When Muslims commit outrages in the West, this is blamed on us because of something which is called Islamophobia. In fact, we have been warned repeatedly by elite opinion that we had better shut up about the Muslims, or Muslims will use this as an excuse to kill us even more. Yes, so this argument is completely unavailing. There has been much overt exterminationist reasoning going on in elite circles. This is reaching a fever pitch. And I said that Lehman is a clever woman. Critical race theory is genocidal in its intent. If white people are infected by a virulent disease called racism, which ruins the world, and there was nothing that can be done to cure racism, then the solution is obvious, isn't it? White people must get it in the neck. Speaking of exterminationist language, here's a piece from the Mail by Adam Schrader. A white psychoanalyst has published a paper in a respected academic journal branding whiteness a malignant parasitic-like condition that is incurable and triggers perverse appetites. Dr. Donald Moss published the article titled On Having Whiteness last month in the Journal of the American Psychoanalytical Association, the abstract of which is available online. Dr. Moss, who teaches psychoanalysis at the New York Psychoanalytic Institute and the San Francisco Center for Psychoanalytics, has been slammed online by other psychologists and psychiatrists for his new research. Whiteness is a condition one first acquires and then one has, a malignant parasitic-like condition to which white people, and white is in scare quotes because, of course, whiteness doesn't exist. Other people have been racialized, but whiteness doesn't exist. So this very strongly suggests that we are, in fact, non-people. We don't exist. We're ghosts or witches, perhaps. Parasitic whiteness renders its host appetites voracious, insatiable, and perverse. Perverse? Well, certainly, that is what we are seeing from white people today, like Dr. Donald Moss. These deformed appetites particularly target non-white peoples. It has been my experience and the experience of many others who have had some experience around other peoples of the world that they hate each other. They all hate each other. It is only in the West, only among those who are denounced as white, who make an effort to be fair amongst the different people of the world. Look everywhere in the world and look for this liberal Western fairness. You will not find it. You will find people sticking up for their racial and ethnic interests. The abstract continues, once established, these appetites are nearly impossible to eliminate. Effective treatment consists of a combination of psychic and social historical interventions. Yes, white people are not only evil, they are mad. They are mad. So the progressives have reached the point of the late period Soviet Union. We're dissidents. How could one object to the greatness of the Soviet Union? Why, they must be mad. So they started institutionalizing people. We are not far off from that here. Dr. Moss wrote that interventions can reasonably aim only to reshape whiteness's infiltrated appetites while calling whiteness a chronic condition for which there is not yet a permanent cure. The ravages wreaked by the chronic condition can function either as warning, never again, or as temptation, great again. Memorialization alone, therefore, is no guarantee against regression. Last February, Dr. Moss taught an On Having Whiteness course with the same messages as the new journal article. Tickets for the course cost $40 for members of the general public to attend at the Center for Modern Psychoanalytical Studies. A flyer shows that learning objectives for the course included teaching participants how to explain the concept of internal racial identity and identify obstacles to clinicians working effectively with issues of race in the therapeutic relationship. In his course outline, Moss wrote that whiteness is malignant because it spreads, metastasizes. It's a form of cancer. Whiteness is a form of cancer, echoing famous white person Susan Sontag, who famously or infamously said that white people are the cancer of human history. Moss continues, this susceptibility is grounded in pre-existing hierarchical representations of self and object in any representation that organize self and other in a vertical relation, powerful and powerless. For whiteness, the most perceptually available category over which to establish hierarchical relations is color. Race provides whiteness its easiest target. People were quick to target Moss for the racist article in posts made to Twitter. Psychologist Dr. Philip Pellegrino tweeted, "How do my colleagues consider this scholarship? What's the deal with these journals? Is it that no one cares anymore and they're just mailing it in? Or are they scared to offend the woke mob? Or are they ideologically driven? Does science even factor into this anywhere?" Another Twitter user wrote, "I was skeptical, so I looked it up, and yeah, this is real, and now I want to throw my psychology degree into the garbage." Well, we found out, what was it, within the last week, that Yale University hosted a Pakistani psychiatrist from New York City to speak about how she wanted to empty a pistol into a crowd of white people, and more and more and more of this eliminationist language. And that woman is still standing, you know. Moss also addressed racism, homophobia, and misogyny in a journal article from 2001 titled "On Hating in the First Person Plural, Thinking Psychoanalytically About Racism, Homophobia, and Misogyny." Yes, science now appears to be like everything else, that it is simply about race and, and sexual perversion. But when it is about race, this is treated entirely politically, and it is all hate the white man. Again, look, this couldn't be clearer. If whiteness is an incurable sickness, if it is a cancer that destroys the world, well, then the obvious solution, I'm not going to name it, I might get in trouble, but I mean, the obvious solution is right there in front of us. People hear this stuff. It floats through the culture. So it's acceptable to kill white people. Is it? Well, we know where this sort of thing leads. I talked about this fellow, what was his name? I mentioned him, Kahinde Andrews. What is he doing in Britain? Similarly, I could ask, what is Ilhan Omar doing in the United States of America? She can't blame her parents for taking them there. I guess she can blame Bill Clinton, because it was Bill Clinton's, ill-advised intervention in Somalia that led to Ilhan Omar ending up in the United States. It was rather tricky. Nonetheless, she had to marry her brother in order to get in. But now she is a member of the House of Representatives. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi accused Ilhan Omar of fomenting prejudice by drawing false equivalence between democracies such as the United States and Israel and terrorist groups such as Hamas and the Taliban. Her condemnation is the latest sign of tensions within the Democratic Party, as progressive members of the so-called Squad insist that Israel be held accountable for its actions against Palestinians. Omar accused her critics within the Democratic Party of whipping up Islamic hate against her after they complained she was comparing atrocities committed by American and Israeli troops with those of terrorist groups. Intersectionality will eat itself. It is unsustainable. Nancy Pelosi is a woman, and that's her intersectionality. She's not an immigrant. She's not black. She's heterosexual. And so she is very low on the totem pole. There is a group of near octogenarians who still control the Democratic Party. They will all be dead within a decade, and probably within 5 years. And after that, well, après le déluge, as they say. Ilhan Omar had tweeted, "It's shameful for colleagues who call me when they need my support to now put out a statement asking for clarification and not just call. The Islamophobic tropes in this statement are offensive. The constant harassment and silencing from the signers of this letter is unbearable." Oh, yes. Who is silencing Ilhan Omar? Who? She is a very noisy person. She doesn't seem abashed or ashamed. We have the same level of accountability and justice for all victims of crimes and humanity, Omar wrote. We have seen unthinkable atrocities committed by the U.S., Hamas, Israel, Afghanistan, and the Taliban. The analogy, this is from a story in the New York Times, the analogy prompted outrage from a dozen Jewish Democrats in the House. Oh, Jewish Democrats in the House. How about Americans? That she insulted the United States of America above all, but let's go to the Jewish Democrats first and see what they have to say. House Democratic aide familiar with the back and forth, I said Omar's anger stemmed from her treatment by the dozen colleagues who publicly upbraided her. She had heard that they were going to publicly call for a clarification of her remarks. Clarification? They couldn't be any clearer than they are already. Representative Rashida Tlaib, a Democrat of Michigan, and the House's only Palestinian American, who has called Israeli policies apartheid and racist, defended Omar. "I am tired of colleagues, both a Democratic and Republican, demonizing Ilhan Omar," she wrote on Twitter. "Their obsession with policing her is sick. She has the courage to call out human rights abuses, no matter who is responsible. That's better than colleagues who look away if it serves their politics." Rashida Tlaib, yes. How exactly did this woman end up in the United States? Well, we know how. Because of the 1965 Immigration Act, and a great part of the Detroit area seems to be, how should I put it, more Middle Eastern than American, more Arabic than American. And also on this topic, oh yes, it's the same in Britain as it is in the United States. It's the same in Canada. These people who come here via colonialist connections, if you will, are the fiercest opponents of the countries where they have ended up. Black Studies professor who sparked outrage by saying Britain is built on racism claims the Queen is the world, quote, "the world's #1 symbol of white supremacy," unquote. Professor Kehinde Andrews, a campaigner regularly wheeled out for TV debates, said this after Oxford students voted to remove a picture of the Queen from their common room. Professor Andrews said he did not understand why this would be such a big deal. The professor of Black Studies at Birmingham City University, that venerable institution, where senior lecturers receive an average base salary of £46,000 a year, has previously branded whiteness a psychosis. Yes, and let's not talk about white genocide here, because Claire Lehman is upset by this. She's horrified by this. Whiteness a psychosis, according to Kennedy, called for the overthrow of genocidal capitalism and repeatedly compared Winston Churchill to Adolf Hitler. During a debate into whether the Queen had been cancelled today, Professor Andrews told Good Morning Britain, "If we're honest, the Queen doesn't just represent modern colonialism. The Queen is probably the #1 symbol of white supremacy in the entire world." Why? Because she is almost entirely a figurehead, a born-to-rule elite of this really white family. Boo, white. How about these royal families in Africa? They seem pretty black. Not a lot of whiteness there. And more from Kahende. Let's see what we can find out from the Wikipedia entry on him. He was born in 1983. His full name is Kahende Nkosi Andrews. I wonder where the Andrews came from. He is director of the Center for Critical Social Research, in other words, anti-whiteness, founder of the Harambee Organization of Black Unity, and co-chair of the UK Black Studies Association. Although Andrews was born in the United Kingdom, he believed that it's, quote, a land of racism and hate, unquote. Despite his hatred of his country and hatred of the people who've invited him, he is a frequent contributor to The Guardian and has written for The Independent, The New Statesman, CNN, Open Democracy, and often appears as a guest on the BBC and Good Morning Britain. In 2018, Andrews tweeted that the sight of a Union Jack stirred the same feelings in him as the sight of a Confederate flag does for African Americans. Then fuck off. It's that simple. I'm sure that his native country has tremendous need for scholars as powerful as Andrews. So he should, go back home. Do what he can to build up his own people. Here's another story from the Daily Mail by Josh White and Elliot Mulligan. Cecil Rhodes triggers Oxford Civil War. 150 academics write petition to Oriel College refusing to tutor its students or collaborate on work until it topples statue of the donor that glorifies colonialism. Are all of these people who are Rhodes Scholars, bad hats to a man, by the way, are they going to pay back the benefits, the tens of thousands of pounds worth or more that they received for being selected Rhodes Scholars? Or have they only learned last week who Cecil Rhodes was and how he made his money? Oxford University descended into civil war last night after academics urged colleagues to boycott Oriel College over its refusal to remove a statue of Cecil Rhodes. In an unprecedented move, Dons, led by Professor Kate Tunstall, the head of another Oxford college, called on staff to stop holding tutorials for Oriel students until the monument to the colonialist is removed. One senior Don told the Daily Mail, "This is despicable and mean-minded. It is unprecedented for the head of one college to attack and detract from the teaching of students at another. This is politics based on ignorance and bias and should have nothing to do with Oxford or any other university." Last month saw Oriel reject calls to tear down the statue of Rhodes after an independent commission produced a 144-page report on the issue following a long-running Rhodes Must Fall campaign. An Oxford student in the 1870s, Rhodes left money to Oriel on his death in 1902, and his statue stands on the college's building on Oxford High Street. An imperialist businessman and politician, he played a dominant role in southern Africa in the late 19th century, driving the annexation of vast swaths of land. Yes, this Kate Tunstall woman doesn't look the type of person I would like to meet in a dark alley. No, not to be confused with K.T. Tunstall, the Scottish singer, songwriter, and musician. Kate Tunstall is on the faculty of medieval and modern languages at Oxford. She's on leave from October 2019 to 2023 while serving as interim provost of Worcester College. All right. And, you know, this is, much of this is ridiculous, but it is still hateful nonetheless. You want to talk about cultural genocide, cultural erasure? This is by Lee Brown in the New York Post. Bye Bye America's Pie, a UK newspaper, is being accused of trying to cancel apple pie by linking it to slavery and the ongoing genocide of indigenous people. In a lengthy examination in The Guardian, author and scholar Raj Patel lists the ways that people are wrong in assuming that nothing could be more American than apple pie, with even the recipe a ripoff of a British pumpkin pie. You see, it's the same thing, but the ingredients inside are different. You understand how that works? He then lists at length the sometimes bloody origins of almost every part of the beloved dish, from apples, sugar, and even the gingham cloth it is traditionally served with. In the drama of nationalist culture, the bloody and international origins of the apple pie are subject to a collective amnesia. The apple pie is as American as stolen land, wealth, and labor. We live its consequences today, concluded the author, a research professor in the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas. Why don't you go home, Raj Patel? The article, Food Injustice Has Deep Roots, Let's Start with America's Apple Pie, details how apples came to the West in the 1500s with colonists and their vast and ongoing genocide of indigenous people. English colonizers then used apple trees as markers of civilization, which is to say, property. John Chapman, better known as Johnny Appleseed, took these markers of colonized property to the frontiers of U.S. expansion, where his trees stood as symbols that indigenous communities had been extirpated. He linked sugar to the slave trade and gingham to the war capitalism that enslaved and committed acts of genocide against millions of indigenous people in North America and millions of Africans and their descendants through the transatlantic slave trade. Okay. Yes, again, this is both pathetic and dangerous. Especially, the fact that we invite foreigners into our countries in order to demean us, degrade us, replace us, and quite possibly finish us off. Finally, on this topic, who are these people, these revolutionaries? Fighting the brave fight, are they? Unrecompensed? They all seem to be doing pretty well for themselves as university professors or heads of NGOs or the like. Victor Davis Hanson writes in American Greatness, "This isn't your father's left-wing revolution. Today's revolutionaries aren't fighting the man. They are the man." Starry-eyed radicals in the 1960s and 70s dreamed that they either were going to take over America or destroy it. Well, it would appear they've done both. One of their favorite psychodramatic mottos was change it or lose it, even as protests focus on drugs, music, race, class, sex, fashion, and almost anything and everything. 60s radicals tutored America on long hair, wire rim eyeglasses, and who was a drag, a square, a bummer, and who was hip, cool, groovy, mellow, and far out. Most of these silly revolutionaries were not unhinged weathermen killers or SDS would-be communists, but just adolescents along for the good time ride. With the end of the draft in 1972, the winding down of the Vietnam War, the oil embargoes, and the worsening economy, the 60s revolution withered away. Cynics claimed the revolution was mostly about middle-class students with long hair kicking back during the peak of the post-war boom, indulging their appetites and ensuring they would not end up in Vietnam. It is not even true that the 60s at least ensured needed reform. The civil rights movement and equal rights for women and gays were already birthed before the hippies, as were folk songs and early rock music. Instead, what the 60s revolution did was accelerate these trends, but also radicalize, manipulate, and coarsen them. I don't know. I'm rather tired of this incessant fixation on the 1960s. As much as I liked Helen Andrews' book Boomers, which I recommend, these trends were well underway before the boomers began flowering in the 1960s. If you want to find out how far back this goes, you can read Christopher Lasch, where as early as the 1920s, Americans were being instructed to put away their traditions and folk wisdom because the experts have decided that everything you think you know is wrong, and we, the experts, are in charge now. Of course, when it comes to people pointing out that the same people like Blair and Clinton who marched against the Vietnam War turned out to be warmongers when they came to power. Why did this happen? The answer is really simple. Because Vietnam wasn't their war. That is to say, they weren't in charge in it. Iraq, Afghanistan, Serbia, and all the rest, the long list, those were their wars. And so they must be good by definition, because they are good people. So let's take a look at the chat. Don Willis says, free sex, free your mind, free drugs, what could go wrong? American Sultanov says, radical politics were central to Marxist-Leninist program. Steve says, I think the 60s accelerated it. Yeah, I don't know about that. You see much of what happened in the 60s, these protests, it was theater, The so-called new leftism, associated with the Students for a Democratic Society, it was serious, but peace, love, dope, burn the flag, burn your bra, all that. Again, theater. Yo Mama, the guy who played Grandpa Walton was a bisexual communist. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Will Geer, a very nasty man indeed. Whenever that show comes on and I see his face, this is perfect. This is perfect Hollywood. Let's take a man who was antithetical to what most people understand America to be and make him a symbol, a wise old symbol of America. Burke and Sultanov says anti-white stuff being said in the U.S. is almost verbatim the same as anti-white libels spouted in South Africa. Yo Mama says Johnny Appleseed was a pacifist, a Swedenborgian. I didn't know about that Swedenborgianism. It's just a game at this point, 6 degrees until slavery, says Steve. Roulette Crack says Raj Patel. Laugh my ass off. Star Rover says Cecil Rhodes' crime was creating a first world civilization in what had been a primitive wilderness. I'm not an admirer of Cecil Rhodes. Yes, let's steal what the Afrikaners have and claim that we are doing it because of morality. No, it was just out and out theft. Oh, okay. UK invented concentration camps, says Texas Feral Hog. Yes, in the Boer Wars, as part of the scheme to steal what the Afrikaners had, particularly gold and diamonds. The group of men that they were dubbed the Randlords, who became quite wealthy and powerful as a result of this. Roulette Crack says, one thing that stops me getting angry is that before immigration, there was World War I and II, which were worse than the current year. It seems like stupidity has always been the problem. Weimar moment in the U.S. are worse, says Burkhan Sultanov. They've assimilated into a culture that teaches them to hate their country, says Steve. Of course, obviously there's a great deal of truth to this. But on the other hand, if I were to move to a country, even whose culture is as close to my own as, say, France or Italy, I would be exceedingly shy about telling these people, your civilization stinks. It always has stunk. You are doing everything wrong. This is what you should do. This is what you must do. instead. No, I think that most people are shy about that. The doors blew open in 1965, says Don Willis. These have never learned to assimilate, nor did they want to. Just give us freedom, a new light, but keep your stinking racist patriarchy. Patel is a high caste name, says Chogokin 666. I don't know whether it's highest caste. I don't think it's a Brahmin caste, but I stand to be corrected. Okay. Yes. Risible, but also outrageous and dangerous. This is from Eric Lendrum at American Greatness. Joe Biden's proposed budget for the year 2022 was found to contain anti-scientific language that eliminates the concept of gender, or sex, as we used to call it, from the act of childbirth. The budget plan, which cost a record-breaking total of $6 trillion, dedicates over $200 million in healthcare spending for the purpose of reducing the high rate of maternal mortality and race-based disparities in outcomes among birthing people. Despite providing no evidence to back up this assertion, the phrase birthing people replaces the more widely known and correct term, which is mother. The push to replace mother with birthing people is part of a broader effort to eliminate so-called gendered language, with the left claiming that gender is merely a social construct and that there are more than two genders, even though both claims are false. Yes, it's a funny thing that's happened to, feminism, that it has led, perhaps indirectly, to attempts to actually abolish women. Yes, I'm not exaggerating here. Oh, anyone can give birth. Oh, really? When you have trans people talking about, their periods and all the rest of it, this is an attempt to abolish women. I mean, there's no difference between women and any other people who identify as women. And, oh, yes, I mentioned Prince Harry and Meghan Mertz previously. I can't say that I'm an admirer of Noel Gallagher, of his music, or of his person, but I do admire the fact that this is a man who says what he thinks. Noel Gallagher has branded Prince Harry an effing woke snowflake for publicly criticizing the royal family. Keep in mind that Gallagher and his brother Liam are Manchester Irish. I believe I read somewhere that Noel Gallagher does not consider himself to be English or British, but apparently even he has his limits. The Oasis frontman, 54, who has a notoriously sour relationship with his own brother, Liam, says he sympathizes with Prince William for having a brother who is shooting his effing mouth off. He told The Sun, Prince William, I feel that effing lad's pain. He's got an effing younger brother shooting his effing mouth off with shit that is just so unnecessary. The rocker also criticized Harry for dissing your family, referring to Harry and Meghan's recent Oprah special and Harry's mental health documentary series in which he has lambasted the royal family and told him to shut up. Let's talk about, let's talk about residential schools. I have spoken to the retired Bishop of Calgary, Fred Henry, on several occasions, and he is one of the few bishops in my country who I trust. This is a story from a Post Media. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is whitewashing the federal government's role in the deadly operation of residential schools by singling out the Roman Catholic Church for blame, said Most Reverend Fred Henry, Bishop Emeritus of the Calgary Diocese. In an open letter to the Prime Minister, Henry, who presided over Southern Alberta Catholics from 1998 to 2017, accused Trudeau of deflecting blame for the deaths and misery of Indigenous residents at the school by voicing his disappointment over the church's failure to formally apologize for its role. Henry wrote, while acknowledging our own sorrow and guilt and trying to own our sinfulness in the participation in residential schools, it is important to note the wording in our statement, especially the words participation in government policies. Henry wrote, primary responsibility must be owned by the federal government. In an interview, he added, it's very nice to play the Pope card, but this has nothing to do with the Pope. It's for the bishops to deal with. He went on to say the schools, some of which were operated by other Christian denominations between 1831 and 1996, were often starved of resources by the federal government. 1831, there was no Canada before 1867, but let's forget that. Were often starved of resources by the federal government, leading to tragic outcomes, including the deaths of thousands of children, many of whom were buried in unmarked graves. Henry's missive was sparked by the backlash over the recent discovery through ground-penetrating radar of the remains of 215 children buried in unmarked graves at a former residential school site in Kamloops, BC. Where's the evidence of this? Where's the report? We haven't seen it yet, and there's not going to be any evidence because there's not going to be an exhumation allowed, and it's going to remain a claim forever. All part of the shakedown. And another day, another payoff to angry Indians. This is from the Canadian Press. A settlement has been reached in a class action lawsuit against the federal government involving hundreds of First Nations people left out of residential school compensation. The lawsuits were brought by Indigenous students known as day scholars, who attended the notorious residential schools but returned to their homes at night. That is to say, they attended at a time when they were no longer residential schools. They were just plain schools. Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Carolyn Bennett said the settlement will see survivors receive compensation of $10,000 each to address additional harms suffered by the students at the school. Ottawa will also invest $50 million into a day scholars revitalization fund. Two survivors of the school, Charlotte Gilbert and Deanna Jules, said they are heartened to finally be recognized for the pain and horrors they endured at the schools after fighting for 14 years to receive compensation. How long before people who, live near the school or passed by it or have seen pictures or even thought of it get compensation? And in further intersectionality news, this is from Kevin Bissett at National Newswatch. New Brunswick MP Jenica Atwin announced Thursday she has left the Green Party to join the Liberal caucus, mainly because of ongoing internal rifts among the Greens over the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It has been really difficult to focus on the work that needs to be done on behalf of my constituents, she said. It certainly has played a role. The defection leaves the Green Party, which has two lawmakers in the House of Commons. Atwin made history in the October 2019 general election when she became the first Green MP to be elected east of British Columbia. But last month, she openly challenged Green leader Annamie Paul's position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. On May the 11th, Atwin posted a message on Twitter saying a statement from Paul calling for de-escalation of the conflict was totally inadequate. I stand with Palestine and condemn the unthinkable airstrikes in Gaza. End apartheid, Atwin wrote. 3 days later, Paul's senior advisor, Noel Zatzman, addressed solidarity with Zionists in a Facebook post that accused some unnamed Green MPs of anti-Semitism and discrimination. Paul had attempted to remain above the fray, saying party debate is healthy. Yes, I don't know why this dispute would in any way impair her ability to do her job. And it's interesting that the Liberals would accept such a person. Now, I don't think that this story is going to, no, it's not. It is not going to mention one of the most important aspects of this story, which is that the new leader of the Green Party, Annamie Paul, despite being a Black woman from the Caribbean, is also Jewish. Now, I would guess that the Green Party is exceedingly anti-Israel, but they nonetheless selected a Jewish woman to be their leader, which I don't know. It could lead to the sundering of the party itself. And yeah, okay. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are suing again. Richard Kay writes for the Mail, is there nothing Harry and Meghan do that doesn't involve a row? How desperately sad that even something so uplifting as the birth of their new baby is accompanied by thundering controversy. The brusque public statements and angry threats of legal action that followed claims by the BBC that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex did not ask the Queen about naming their daughter Lilibet, her childhood nickname, now seems depressingly familiar. But even allowing for the couple's inflated sense of grievance that their every action is willfully misconstrued, there was something intensely unedifying about this latest incendiary development, not least the fact of the timing. For it has come on the eve of what would have been Prince Philip's 100th birthday, a moment of deep personal reflection for the Queen, who just 9 weeks after his death is still grieving the husband who was her strength and stay. Instead, she finds herself in the crossfire of a bitter war of words between the BBC, Buckingham Palace, and the American-based Sussexes. Yes, the case against the company that owns the Daily Mail is still going ahead. People are saying that the Mertzes have won that battle. It's not over yet. What is science? More to the point, who is science? Well, in fact, we know who science is. It is Dr. Anthony Fauci, because he says so. And he even speaks about himself in the third person thereby. According to Joe DiPaolo at Mediaite, Dr. Anthony Fauci has evidently had enough of the increasing criticism being pointed his way, particularly from the political right. In what became a fiery rant on MSNBC's MTP Daily Wednesday, Fauci, speaking with host Chuck Todd, he of the flesh-colored beard, blasted those attacking him on a variety of subjects, ranging from his mask advocacy to the question of whether the National Institutes of Health funded gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The impetus for Fauci's screed on Wednesday was a video from Senator Marsha Blackburn, Republican of Tennessee, who floated a conspiracy theory that the infectious disease expert was colluding with Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg on a narrative about COVID-19. He is and has colluded with Mark Zuckerberg as an expert, providing expert advice to Facebook. It's not a conspiracy theory. Incredible. I don't have a clue what she just said. Fauci said curtly. I don't have a clue what she's talking about. I'm sorry, I don't want to be pejorative against a United States senator, but I have no idea what she's talking about. And you know, Chuck, if you go through each and every one of the points, which are so ridiculous, just painfully ridiculous, if you go through each and every one of them, you can explain and debunk it immediately. He went on to say, it's very dangerous, Chuck, because a lot of what you're seeing as attacks on me, quite frankly, are attacks on science, because all of the things I've spoken about consistently, yes, he actually used that word consistently, from the very beginning have been fundamentally based on science. Sometimes those things were inconvenient truths for people, and there was pushback against me. So if you're trying to get at me as a public health official and scientist, you're really not attacking not only Dr. Anthony Fauci, you are attacking science. And anybody that looks at what is going on clearly sees that. You have to be asleep not to see that. Okay, so we found out within the past couple of weeks that Dr. Fauci misrepresented his own opinions, his own beliefs, again and again and again and again to the American public. And his actions fomented panic and arguably fomented an economic collapse. This is all on the record. We have the emails, and we can compare them, what his scientific opinion was of masks and of the lab leak hypothesis at Wuhan. We can compare these things and others to what he said in public, and they're diametrically opposed. But the regime media has decided there's no story here. The right is anti-science. Well, what Fauci had to say publicly was anti-science because it contrasted as much as can be between his considered opinions based on the science at the time. But no, he just changes his opinions again and again and again and again. No, I'm not. Nope. Let's see. Liz Shield writes at American Greatness. Fauci also dismissed early questions about whether the virus leaked from the nearby bat virus factory. However, the leak theory is gaining credibility now that Donald Trump is out of office. You see, science and medicine are only viewed in context of political utility. So long as Trump was in office, anything related to the virus was considered science. If it increased people's misery and the death count, because that would look bad for Trump's reelection. This is why we have a few therapeutics and promotion of those therapeutics for those who have been infected. Positive test takers were just sent away with the hope they wouldn't plow into the ER gasping for breath. So now Fauci is trying to pretend he's a scientist and not a political actor, but you don't stay in government as long as he has and risen to the level he has without being a political actor. And in the have we learned any lessons from this fiasco? No, we haven't, department. Rachel Sharp in the Mail. The acting head of the White House Budget Office has refused to rule out sending more U.S. money to the Wuhan lab COVID-19 is feared to have leaked from. Acting Office of Management and Budget Director Shalanda Young said she would never make that commitment to cut off future funding to the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China. If the Republicans are not jumping all over this, in fact, stomping on it with hobnailed boots, they don't deserve to survive. Well, why wouldn't we send more money to a Chinese laboratory that creates potentially, catastrophic viruses? We make viruses more lethal. And, well, what possibly could be wrong with that? Are you against science? You know what? There's this old joke, about a scientist. You've seen this you've seen it on The Simpsons. You've seen it on Futurama about the scientist who wants to create a doomsday device. And then he has all these people pointing fingers at him and calling him a monster. And, well, what's wrong with you? Are you against science? I mean, the doomsday device adds to the sum of human knowledge. Only blinkered, ignorant people could be opposed to that. Amongst the intellectuals, Jonathan Chait, who I suppose is considered one, God knows why, he writes in the New York Magazine's Intelligencer, last night Lindsey Graham told Sean Hannity's audience that the news media's dismissal of the lab leak hypothesis changed the course of this election. Graham's argument is that, had the media acknowledged the theory, the election would have been about holding China accountable, and hence Trump would have won. This analysis, Chait argues, makes about as much sense as anything else said on Hannity's show. First, the lab leak was and is a hypothesis, so the extent of China's culpability, if any, would never have been proven in any case. How many of the beliefs that we act on every single day have been proven? Second, Trump himself repeatedly praised the Chinese government's handling of the virus. China has been working very hard to contain the coronavirus. He tweeted January 24th. The United States greatly appreciates their efforts and transparency at a time Biden was raising questions about the lab leak. And third, Trump's efforts to hold China's government accountable would have simply failed, merely highlighting once again Trump's inability to handle a pandemic. Oh, really? Failed. How about most favored nation status? How about taking that away from them? How about sending their diplomats home? How about stop sending them aid? All sorts of things that Trump could have done. But no, See, Trump was doomed to lose the election in 2020 because, as we have learned in recent weeks, any Republican victory is illegitimate by definition. But Chait is quite upset, perhaps worried, that this lab leak hypothesis has gained widespread support, even amongst people deemed to be progressives. Yes, nemesis following hubris is an old story. This is a sad example, but it is an example nonetheless. This is from healthimpactnews.com. A 57-year-old husband, father, and grandfather is dead in what is fast becoming a trend of death after social media virtue signaling. Mr. Ronald Babb Sr. and his wife Rose received the experimental Johnson & Johnson viral vector shot on April 12th. They received the shot at a Walmart on Genesee Street in Camillus, New York, about 14 miles west of Syracuse. Mr. Babb posted that he and his wife's vaccine cards on Facebook with a caption saying that they're waiting to turn into robots. Yes, and here's a picture of his Facebook post and COVID vaccination report card. Walmart, trusted by millions who get these shots at their stores, mixed up the day and year on Babb's card. Thus, it says he received the shot in 2012. Walmart also spelled Janssen incorrectly. Further, the turn into robots mock is apparently in reference to the nanotechnology associated with both PCR testing and the experimental shots. Tiny Theragripper devices, robots carry and release drugs into your body when commanded to do so, according to Johns Hopkins University. Mainstream media refer to the foregoing as conspiracy theory and disinformation. Babb joked further about the clerical error on his card, but Babb's niece was the voice of reason and brought genuine concern and an adult presence to the discussion. Megan Baker tweeted, "Be careful with the J&J, Uncle Ron. I hope you both don't develop any severe side effects." Yes, and then he died 10 days later. Many such cases. Oh, yes. I have been seeing an enormous amount of propaganda on TV. Vaccine. Get the vaccine. It's your duty. Chrissy Teigen's husband. Yeah, it's our chance. It's our chance. It's our chance. Get the jab. Get the jab. Gotta get the jab. Are you a good social citizen? Get the jab. I've seen this in both American and Canadian TV with Washington State seems to be going particularly nuts over this. And here's an example. This is shameful. You know, I mentioned a few weeks ago that Indira Gandhi got into a spot of bother. This was before, she was shot to death by Sikh militants. But deciding that there were too many people in India, she decided to do something about it, to sterilize men. That many thousands of men in India were offered transistor radios if they agreed to vasectomies. They did not know what they were agreeing to. Afterwards, they were pleased to have a transistor radio, but less than pleased when they found out that they were infertile. This is from ABC News. Adults can claim a complimentary joint of marijuana in Washington State this week when they receive a COVID-19 vaccine shot. The Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board announced Monday that the promotion, called Joints for Jabs, was effective immediately and would run through July the 12th. During the afforded time period, state-licensed cannabis retailers are permitted to give one free pre-roll joint to customers who are 21 and older when they receive their first or second dose of the COVID-19 vaccine at an active on-site vaccination clinic. Customers can only claim the complimentary joint from the retail location during the same visit as receiving the jab. Yes, you can get high for free if you get the jab. Does that strike anyone as ethical? Doesn't strike me as being ethical. And of course, Canada has got involved in this as well. Let's see. This is a story from CBC. Manitoba COVID vaccine incentives. Prizes include $2 million in prizes to people who get vaccinated. Prizes include $100,000 in cash, $25,000 scholarships. We need Manitobans to get vaccinated. The sooner we get vaccinated, the sooner we get our lives back. This lottery gives Manitobans a reason to move faster, to roll up their sleeves, not once but twice, said Premier Brian Pallister as he made the announcement along Manitoba Liquor and Lotteries President and CEO Manny Atwal. Yes, get money, big money for getting the jab. As has been pointed out by others, this rather suggests a lack of confidence in the jab. Why do you have to offer people free donuts, free burgers and fries, free alcohol, free drugs in order to get the vaccine? If the vaccine is that safe and efficacious, doesn't it, in effect, sell itself? From John Bacon at USA Today, 178 healthcare workers suspended from Houston Methodist Hospital system for refusing COVID-19 vaccination. Do they have the right to do that? I suppose we shall find out. Let's take a quick look at lockdown skeptics. If the Indian variant really is 60% more infectious, why is it so tame in other countries? NHS told to differentiate between patients in hospital for COVID and those in hospital with COVID and not before time. Moderna hopes its COVID vaccine will be the second to be authorized for use in American children. SAGE member and communist Susan Michie says we will need face masks and social distancing forever. This woman is a professor of health psychology at University College London. Brian Pallister may say that we're going to be free after everyone gets the jab, but there are some very influential people who believe that we must never be allowed to be free. Again, England's NHS waiting list hits 5 million for the first time. And let's take a look at Alex Berenson's Twitter feed. CDC has now analyzed the VAERS data on COVID vaccine myocarditis in teens and young adults. It is terrible. Based only on received reports, and remember, most side effects go unreported. Even when they are serious, the rate is as high as 40 times the background rate. 40 times. But that likely sharply underestimates the real rate because CDC used a very long window, 31 days, to determine the background rate, when in reality, most cases occur within days of the second dose. The proof of how bad and common this is comes in the age stratification. Let's assume the vaccines don't cause myocarditis in people over 65. In that case, we would expect to see, per CDC, 36 to 360 cases, the background rate. The midpoint is roughly 200. How many cases have been reported in that age group? 26. In other words, using the midpoint as a reference, only 1 in 8 cases of myocarditis following vaccination have been reported in the 65 plus group. That sounds about right, knowing what we know about voluntary side effects. If the gap between the real incidence and reported cases is similar in the teen young adult group, we would need to multiply the number of reported cases by 8. That would imply the vaccines cause myocarditis in young people at up to 300 times the background rate. Sorry, deleted the tweet where I said CDC didn't sex stratify. They didn't by age group, but they did offer an overall breakdown, 80 to 20 male to female. If that is true for young adults, the math changes slightly. The top end potential risk for men is more like 500 times, not 600 times. By which I mean young men could be raising the risk of myocarditis as much as 500-fold in getting the second mRNA shot. Again, this estimate may be high. It goes down if you figure myocarditis in young adults is frequently being reported to VAERS, or a higher base rate, but you cannot get it anywhere near 1. The risk here is real and substantial. So remind me why anyone under 25, 30 really, is getting this shot. Oh yeah, because they have to. And let's talk about, this is good. This is good. The enormous success, the billions and billions of dollars in profits that the vaccines are making for the drug companies has emboldened them. Story by Mansour Shaheen. 2 members of a U.S. Food and Drug Administration Advisory Committee have resigned in the wake of the agency's approval of aducanumab, the first new Alzheimer's treatment since 2003. Neurologist David Notman, who works for the Mayo Clinic, and Joel Perlmutter of Washington University St. Louis both stepped down from the board this week in protest. Notman and Perlmutter largely objected to the approval of the drug, citing its rocky trial results with little evidence the drug was even effective. The drug, which will be marketed under the name Aduhelm, is being sent out to patients in the next 2 weeks and will cost $56,000 per year of use. So I shouldn't think that very many people had heard about this company called BlackRock before recently, maybe even before that Donald Trump put it in charge of managing America's securities portfolio. But a lot of people are hearing about BlackRock now. On the other hand, I'm sure that most people are familiar with a movie called It's a Wonderful Life. And it's the story of a man played by Jimmy Stewart, who at the beginning of the film is contemplating suicide because he has foregone all the pleasures and opportunities that were available to him in order to devote himself to his small town of Bedford Falls. And he famously is saved by an angel who shows him what life would have been like for himself and for Bedford Falls if he had never existed. And he finds out that there is no Bedford Falls. There is a place called Pottersville. Bedford Falls, George Bailey worked for the local building and loan where he made it possible for people, often people with, let's say, modest incomes, to own their own homes. In Pottersville, people don't own their own homes. They rent. According to Wiki, Bedford Falls is now Pottersville, an unsavory town occupied by sleazy entertainment venues, crime, and amoral people. Is Pottersville America's future? There's a story in Mediaite. Ben Shapiro defends BlackRock after report its en masse home buying is driving up housing prices. He stood out on Thursday as one of the few commentators to defend investment firm BlackRock after a report revealed its investment practices had driven up prices in the housing market. His commentary came in response to a Wall Street Journal report about roughly 200 investment firms buying thousands of homes and sometimes entire neighborhoods around the country before raising prices and capitalizing on home buyers and renters. The practice has enhanced already skyrocketing inflation in the housing market. I see many people are enraged at BlackRock, Shapiro noted in a series of messages weighing in on the issue. BlackRock is buying homes from people willing to sell them. If you don't like what they're doing, target the loose governmental policy incentivizing this sort of investment. If you're mad at BlackRock and want to artificially prevent them from buying single-family homes, I'd like for you to explain to those who currently own their homes why you're taking money out of their pockets. Yes, there's the Pottersville philosophy. He said critics should blame the Fed's insane monetary policy for reducing the cost of loans. Yes, Ben Shapiro doesn't seem to understand how one thing follows the other. Conservatives elsewhere took a more populist tone on the issue, including hillbilly elegy author J.D. Vance, who suggested progressives would simply ignore the problem. The comment provoked Young Turks founder Cenk Uygur to assure readers the left can't stand BlackRock either. This is one of my favorite tweets on this comment from Tim Dillon, BlackRock just bought your town, so what? It's a free country. If you don't like it, go buy in Verizon, Ohio, or Geico, Virginia. Biden should totally own this guy by declaring BlackRock a systemically important financial institution applying heightened prudential standards, said Matt Stoller. And one of my favorite remarks on this, which really goes to the point of this whole issue. The question is, what is the point of the market? Does the market exist to serve us, or do we exist to serve the market? And by the market, of course, I mean the 1%, because that's what we're talking about. Aaron McIntyre tweeted, "Conservatives treat capitalism like a suicide pact." And that is exactly true. And yet another reason why you should never describe yourself as a conservative, because conservatives are less than useless. They are destructive. BlackRock is an enormously powerful company. You can read more about it in a book I reviewed on the Book Club a few weeks ago, called the book on the dictatorship of woke capital, which has a lot to say about BlackRock. I had no idea how big it was, how important it was, how influential it is, how it, to a large extent, drives the markets through its ownerships of blocks of shares in important companies. If BlackRock has an agenda, BlackRock will have its agenda followed through. That's how important BlackRock is. Just briefly, BlackRock is, according to MSN, Bloomberg, we're not really that big, says BlackRock. We just have $9 trillion in assets. We have a very long way to grow, said Mark Wiedman, BlackRock's head of corporate strategy. We may be the leader, but we have only a 3% market share in global asset management. So now there's a question about whether BlackRock is deemed to be too big to fail. And yes, hang on, let's see if I can find this here. The firm has hired notable policymakers over the years, and at least 3 leaders with the New York-based asset manager on the resumes now hold prominent roles in President Joe Biden's cabinet. Golly, how about that? The U.S. government has pitched a policy that would allow private equity into your retirement fund. BlackRock is salivating at the possibility. Here's how the $7 trillion manager would benefit. As of March, BlackRock manages a staggering $9 trillion in other people's money. So that's more than the gross domestic product of every country in the world, except for the United States and China. But keep in mind, they're not that big. And they plan to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And if everyone except the 1% ends up living in Pottersville, well, I guess, as they say, you should have chosen richer parents, or, at the very least, better connected parents, because it's all about money. And increasingly, if you weren't born with it, you're out of luck. You're out of luck. So I want to talk, it's Theater Thursday, and I want to talk about a movie today, which is called A Man for All Seasons, which came out in 1966. And it was produced and directed by Fred Zinnemann. I've talked about Fred Zinnemann before on Theater Thursday, and you can still find on the Two Kevins on YouTube my illustrated review of Zinnemann's book. Of Zinnemann's film, Day of the Jackal, which, by the way, has recently come out on Blu-ray, and Apparently, I'm told it looks tremendous. This movie was written by, well, let me talk a little bit about Zinnemann's career. I've talked about it before. Zinnemann was like one of many Hollywood directors who came to America from Germany or Austria, chased out by the Nazis. There is a film, it's a semi-documentary film, came out in 1929, which you can find on Criterion. It's a fascinating period piece of life in Weimar, Germany. It's called Menschen am Sonntag, or People on Sunday. And, well, who worked on this film? Well, Zinnemann did, and Billy Wilder did, and Edgar Ulmer, and Robert and Kurt Siodmak. Quite a list of people there. So Zinnemann came to the United States in the 1930s, and he made a host of films that most people have seen. Let's see. There is The Men, which I guess is the film that made a star of Marlon Brando. High Noon, From Here to Eternity, Oklahoma, The Nun Story, A Man for All Seasons, The Day of the Jackal, Julia, and 5 Days, One Summer. His films won an enormous number of Oscars, particularly for the actors and actresses in them. And Zinnemann won 2. A Man for All Seasons didn't exactly sweep the Oscars in 1967, but it won more than any other film. Zinnemann won for Best Picture and Best Director. Paul Scofield, who plays Thomas More, won for Best Actor. Robert Shaw lost. Now, he lost to Walter Matthau, and Walter Matthau gave a fantastic performance as a confidence man, Whiplash Willie, in a Billy Wilder film, The Fortune Cookie. Robert Bolt won for Best Screenplay, Ted Moore for his cinematography, and Joan Bridge and Elizabeth Haffenden for their costume design. This was originally a play by Robert Bolt. The movie version is considerably different in 2 ways. One, there had been a theatrical device, of a commentator, the common man, in the play, which was removed. And second, of course, it's a movie, so you can open it up, and it is opened up very beautifully by Fred Zinnemann and by his director of cinematography, Ted Moore, who has lensed, films that you have seen, such as, Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, Diamonds Are Forever, Live and Let Die, Man with the Golden Gun. You see, very close connection to the James Bond franchise. The music is by Georges Delerue, perhaps the greatest French composer for cinema. His films, his Le Mépris, Contempt, is considered by many to be a high point of movie music. He also did Jules et Jim, and many, many films that you have seen. Interestingly enough, there was a novel that came out in the 60s called Our Mother's House, which was filmed with Dirk Bogarde in the lead. And later on, the book was written by Julian Gloag, and a later more famous author stole this for his own novel. And in the movie version, Quincy Jones was then accused of stealing from Georges Delerue. Now, I can't say enough about the art direction and particularly the costume design of this film. I mean, Henry VIII looks absolutely resplendent in this. I mean, it helps that he's played by Robert Shaw, and Robert Shaw was, well, you could call him a Renaissance man. You've seen him in The Sting and in Jaws and in other things. Well, The Taking of Pelham 123, which is one of my very favorite movies. Robert Shaw was more than an actor, both on the stage and on the screen. He was a playwright. He wrote a play called The Man in the Glass Booth, which was a very big success. It's based on the trial of Eichmann in Israel. Robert Shaw was also a novelist, and a very good one, in fact. Shaw, how shall I put this? Shaw became a kind of honorary Irishman. He spent the last few years of his life, and he drank himself to death in the traditional Irish fashion at the early age of 51. He is tremendous in this film as Henry VIII, and he shows what was so likable about Henry. His gregariousness, his eagerness to laugh even at himself, his enjoyment of life, not being a stickler for royal protocols. Paul Scofield played Sir Thomas More on the stage, and we are lucky that he appears in this movie because it was suggested to Fred Zinnemann that Richard Burton or Olivier would be a better choice. They were both terrible overactors. I have a very low opinion of Richard Burton's acting, to court. But no, Scofield, a much better choice. Now, Scofield was, unknown to the American movie-going public, but I'll say this about A Man for All Seasons. It was a beneficiary of what they call the Oscar effect. Now, it didn't make much money at first because it's a rather certain, you could call it a dour historical drama with no stars in it except Orson Welles, who had been a star decades earlier. Now, again, I have to keep reminding people of this because it's important. In those days, movies played for months and months and months in the theaters. Movies would spread by word of mouth, and that's what happened to Laurence Olivier, which was written, screenplay, which was written by Robert Bolt. You could say the same thing for Dr. Zhivago. Laurence Olivier and Dr. Zhivago, both of them played for over a year continuously at the same theater in Vancouver where I lived. So Man for All Seasons won all these awards, and okay, I guess this must be good. So people went to see it, and it ended up making a very handsome profit, given that it had a small budget. You see the list of actors in this film, and it's really remarkable. You have Wendy Hiller playing Thomas More's second wife, and some of you may have seen her in the film by the Archers called "I Know Where I'm Going" from 1945, which is a beautiful film, which I highly recommend. The aforementioned Orson Welles, who really, his bulk really plays to strength as Cardinal Wolsey. Susanna York as Moore's beloved daughter, Margaret, who is really one of the joys of 1960s movies. You have Nigel Davenport as the Duke of Norfolk, and John Hurt who of course became a major star. I suppose many of you, if you see this film, will be shocked by how young he is. In Man for All Seasons, he plays Richard Rich, and his performance is one of the great villains of cinematic history. You have Corin Redgrave playing Moore's son-in-law, William Roper, Colin Blakely, who was in the Wilder film The Private Lock of Sherlock Holmes, also in Murder on the Orient Express. He plays a class-conscious service in this. You have a cameo for which he was not billed of let's see, Corin Redgrave's sister, Vanessa Redgrave, who was a pretty young thing, I must say. And she makes a very good impression in the film. So this is the story of Sir Thomas More, or St. Thomas More, as Catholics call him, the patron saint of lawyers. What is this movie about? It's about conscience. Thomas More says something in this film which really gets to the heart of it. He is being chided over the importance that he gives to conscience. And he says, I think that when statesmen forsake their own private conscience for the sake of their public duties, they lead their country by a short route to chaos. Now, every Catholic politician now says, oh, no, I'm firmly against this, that, or the other, but those are my private views. And, of course, my private views are no way relevant to my public duties. No? Really? I can't imagine how that is possible, because you will often hear these same people talking about things, which are approved by the progressives, and how their deep personal commitment, et cetera, et cetera. Famously, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who was at least a nominal Roman Catholic, when he was running for president in 1960, he was compelled to appear before a conclave of Protestant divines to quiz him about his Catholicism. And it was a successful meeting, because afterwards Kennedy said that he would never allow his private conscience to get in the way of his public duties. And that is not a statement that any Catholic would make. And I'm afraid, even at the time of Henry VIII, it was not a statement. It was a statement that few Catholics would make, even at the time, because very few of them stayed true. Of all the bishops, only John Fisher did, and of course he paid for that with his head. The film is called A Man for All Seasons, and it refers to Thomas More's reputation as one of the greatest men of his age. The screenplay it's a model of its kind. You note the lack of excess narrative. Thomas More wrote a famous book, a book that is still famous today, called Utopia. There is a glancing reference to it, almost off stage. There is no attempt to explain who Thomas More was, in the sense that he was one of the most famous people of the 16th century, and he was known throughout Europe. Great friendship with Erasmus, etc. There is a lot of telescoping in this film. The story of Henry VIII's marriage, his first marriage, how it fell apart, and the consequences, is a very complicated story. But Bolt and Zinnemann only give us all that we need to understand Thomas More and the choices that he made. It's really, as I say, a model of economy. But you see a lot of nature in this film, and I think that this is deliberate. That it is. There's a lot of shots of England, of southern England, of London actually, because Thomas More has a house in the country, which is now called Chelsea. You see England in all of the seasons. And of course, nature dies each year, and then it comes to life in the spring. Well, man dies, and he does not come to life, not in earthly form. And this is really at the crux of the film. That Thomas More believed that the only way to gain happiness, true happiness, was through resurrection in the spirit. And he runs into a great many men who are supposed to believe this, but do not. There are a great many beautiful shots in this film. The opening of the film is really quite bravura, where we see Cardinal Wolsey issuing a command for Sir Thomas to come to Hampton Court. And we see how the letter is written, how it is stamped with wax, sealed with wax, with the cardinal seal, how a messenger takes it out, and we go through various stages, and we go to a boat which rows fast to Moore's house in Chelsea. Visually, how would I say, the appearance of the king and his retinue in two boats, and their departure. It's all beautifully done. There is a wonderful segue shot where we see the setting sun captured between a tree trunk splitting into two trunks. It's captured in the middle. And near the end of the film, we see Thomas More being summoned to the trial, which would end in his being convicted of high treason. And it's framed such that it appears that it's Daniel entering the lion's den, or a man entering the Colosseum in ancient Rome. Beautiful use of available light in this film. Zinnemann and Moore are not afraid of the screen becoming dark. And I suppose I should talk about what's available, how you can get this film. You can watch it on Amazon Prime. It is not available in Blu-ray in the United States. There was an edition on Twilight Time. Twilight Time is a small company which puts out movies in very small editions. And when they're gone, they're gone. And if you want them after that, you can pay $100 or $150 happily. You can buy this film from Amazon Co. UK for the low price of £11, and it's a dual format edition, so it's both a DVD and a Blu-ray. Unfortunately, it is in region 2, but it's chock full of extras, and it uses the same remastering as Twilight Time. And some people might call it grain storm, but I love grain myself. So More is just briefly, Henry VIII, the second Tudor king, had an elder brother called Arthur. Arthur was married to a Spanish princess, Catherine of Aragon. Arthur died. Henry wanted to marry Catherine of Aragon. This is considered incest under Catholic canon law. So he had to apply for a dispensation from the Pope. He applied and he received it. He married Catherine. She proved to be, or one or both of them, proved to be not capable of providing a male heir. Catherine produced a child called Mary, who later had a brief and unhappy reign as queen in the 1550s. Now, the irony of Henry VIII starting a revolution so that he could have a male heir was that despite the 5 other wives that he had after Catherine, well, there was one girl, Elizabeth, but no, it just didn't work out. It didn't work out for Henry. Thomas takes the position that there is nothing invalid about the marriage of Henry and Catherine, and he is not going to agree for her to be put away so that Henry can commit adultery. Despite this, and perhaps in an attempt to suborn him, Henry makes him Lord Chancellor after the death of Cardinal Wolsey, thinking that perhaps, that this would go to his head, and that Thomas, in his gratitude, would support the position that he had previously opposed. Well, he misreckoned on Thomas More. He refused to do so. More and more pressure is put upon him, and we are introduced into the oily character of Richard Rich, who is what they call an office seeker, that he wants to be a great man, and he is willing to do what it takes. He asks him, he said, I have a job for you, at £50 a year, which was a lot of money at the time, to teach at the new school. He says, why not be a teacher? He asks him. You'd be a fine teacher, perhaps a great one. And Rich says, if I was, who would know it? And Moore says, you, your pupils, your friends, God. Not a bad public, that. Oh, and a quiet life. But Rich is he's too ambitious for that. And there's a pivotal scene, which some people might say is too on the nose, which is that Moore is not a fool. He knows from the beginning that Richard Rich is not to be trusted. He also knows that his chief servant is spying on him and is not to be trusted either, because he is passing on information to Thomas Cromwell. So Rich decides to transfer his allegiance to Cromwell, and Cromwell is leaving Moore's house, and Rich, in his eagerness to get to Cromwell, slips and falls headlong into the tidal mud, thus indicating his descent into the world of political grubbiness. And Richard Rich went very far indeed in this world. And he has made it, there's a fine scene in the movie between Leo McKern, the great actor who plays Cromwell, and John Hurt, where Hurt is pretending that, that this is tearing him apart, turning on his old friend, Thomas More, and Leo McKern as Cromwell isn't having any of it. He's seen these people come and go. Essentially, just tell me what you want, and then I'll tell you what you must do to get it. And I suppose one of the most famous lines in this film is often quoted at a time when Richard Rich has become a relatively high official in Wales, which was one of Henry VIII's acts, was to join Wales to England. More says to him, why, Richard, it profits a man nothing to give his soul for the whole world, but Wales? I always found that ironic, of course, because the Tudors were of Welsh origin themselves. And as Dr. Fagan says in Decline and Fall, all the disasters in English history can be traced to Welsh influence. I suppose that's a joke. I've always found it amusing. Moore takes the position based on the ancient law that silence equals consent. He is not going to agree to Henry's marriage, and he's not going to sign the Act of Supremacy. But neither is he going to speak out against these, because silence means consent. But Moore, with all his great faith in the law, he had actually misunderstood the new regime. The new regime was something completely different in English history. And I want to read something from Norman Davis's history, The Isles. Henry VIII of England was a Catholic prince who hated Martin Luther with a passion. In fact, he wrote a book, or Thomas More wrote a book for him, The Defense of the Seven Sacraments, which led to the Pope giving Henry the title Defender of the Faith, which is still used by the monarch of Britain today, which of course is a misuse, but never mind. Married to a daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, the chief patrons of the Holy Inquisition, he had no intention of letting the fulminations of a vulgar ex-monk pass in silence. In 1521, he put his name to a fiercely anti-Lutheran tract mentioned earlier. Earlier, he had not hesitated to declare war on France because France was waging war on the Pope. Not surprisingly, Henry's papist passions paled quickly when he and his wife failed to produce a son and heir, and the Pope failed to grant him the expected divorce or nullification. In retrospect, one can see that the root cause of the whole problem was to be found in the deficiencies of Henry's own reproductive system, not in the shortcomings of his 6 unfortunate wives, not in the weakness of the unreformed English Church, and not in the tortuous politics of the Vatican Chancery. But Henry was not a man to admit to deficiencies. Rather than admit them, he was prepared to put all his subjects in all his realms through years of revolutionary turmoil and to kill every person who stood in his way. The plan, as devised by Thomas Cromwell, was terrifyingly simple. In all matters of faith, save one, England was to be held within the strictest bounds of traditional Catholicism. The Pope was to be removed as head of the Church to facilitate a divorce. At the same time, the wealth of the Church was to be despoiled and divided among Henry's sycophants to offset political reaction. All the acts of the Reformation Parliament, 1529 to 36, were designed to these ends. The Act of Restraint on Appeals, 1533, cut off the English clergy from Rome and from canon law. The Act for Ecclesiastical Appointments, 1534, gave the Crown complete control over the church hierarchy. The Act concerning Peter's Pence, 1534, stopped all financial contributions to Rome. And finally, the Act of Supremacy created an independent and formally separatist Church of England with the monarch at its head. The Act for the Dissolution of the Monasteries, 1536, abolished a few nests of corruption together with the greatest network of social and educational welfare that England had ever known. Yet the king's matrimonial troubles continued. Having set Catherine of Aragon aside, together with their daughter Mary, Henry was able to marry a series of wives and to discard them as necessary. A second daughter, Elizabeth, was born in 1533, only to be promptly declared illegitimate. A weakly son, Edward, was born in 1537, though the birth killed his mother, Jane Seymour. Henry finally had a son and heir. Among the casualties were Sir Thomas More, a former chancellor and leading humanist, executed in 1535 for denying the supremacy. Elizabeth's mother, Queen Anne Boleyn, executed in 1536 for producing a girl child. Queen Catherine Howard, executed in 1542 for alleged adultery. And Thomas Cromwell himself, executed in 1540 for persuading Henry to marrying a plain-looking German woman, Anne of Cleves, the Flanders mare. Until recently, little attention was paid to the thoroughgoing ideological system which Thomas Cromwell invented in order to lubricate his legislative program. Since few doctrinal novelties were introduced at this stage, it was long assumed that little had changed in the realm of ideas. Yet close examination of the Reformation statutes show that each was prefaced by a preamble containing radical theological and historical postulates. Cromwell was not content to create a new legal framework for church and state. He took great care to present theoretical arguments to justify the changes. In particular, he set out to demonstrate two things. Firstly, that the old order which he was destroying had been illegitimate, and secondly, that England was returning to an older, purer state of affairs, which had been steadily corrupted in the intervening period by the false teaching and corrupt practices of the papacy. His argument centered on themes of England as a sovereign empire, of the self-sufficiency of English law, and of historical precedent. What we see in Henry VIII was a man who was determined to turn England upside down in order to facilitate his own adultery. This is the birth of the Anglican Church, pure and simple. What Henry VIII and Cromwell instituted in England is what is called a theocracy, and it was a savage theocracy. Latter-day Anglicans are rather shy about this sort of thing. They're not ones to cite Fox's A Book of Holy Martyrs, for instance. But indeed, this is, again, this is the birth of Anglicanism. The destruction of the church, the theft of church lands, the enrichment of Henry's crony, the displacement of the traditional aristocracy, and the end of England as it had been known. A Man for All Seasons does not get into this. As I say, it is a film about Thomas More, first and foremost. Although the richness of the other characters in this film is really noticeable. There are a few of the actors that I've mentioned that don't get a significant theme, a significant scene in order to show off their talent. But you can often tell a lot about a movie by the people who hate it. And Pauline Kael, who is rather my anti-pole star in matters of cinematic, decided to kill A Man for All Seasons with faint praise in The New Republic in February 1967. She writes, A Man for All Seasons is tasteful and moderately enjoyable. Robert Bolt's dialogue is crisp, lucid, and well-spoken. The actors are generally efficient. Fred Zinnemann's direction is placed at the service of Bolt's material in the manner of a good, modest stage director who does not attempt more than a faithful, respectful interpretation of the play. It's pleasant to see a movie made with integrity and sensibility. A Man for All Seasons wasn't that easy to do, and it wasn't safe, although it appears to have turned out well for all concerned. But that's really just about all I can say for it. As conceived by Bolt, Sir Thomas More isn't a man for all seasons. He isn't particularly relevant to this season. I doubt if he's relevant to any season. As it interpreted by Paul Scofield, he's not my kind of guy either. Bolt's presentation of Moore's martyrdom is so totally one-sided that we don't even get to understand that side, as we might if it were challenged and engaged in conflict. Well, she's either deliberately misrepresenting the film or she wasn't paying attention, because Moore is challenged constantly on the theological and political issues regarding his first marriage. He's challenged by Wolsey. He's challenged by Cranmer. He's challenged by Cromwell. He is challenged by the Duke of Norfolk, challenged again and again and again. He's challenged by his own daughter and his wife. Pauline Kael says, though the principle for which he is beheaded, his belief that the Pope represents divine law so that he's saving his soul in taking the Catholic position against Henry VIII's marriage to Anne Boleyn, seems doubtful at best, it is given as beyond question in this film that a man should follow the dictates of his conscience. Oh, get this. The Afrikaners willing to die for apartheid, and they certainly find their justifications in divine law also, could probably make as good a case. This Moore is simply right, and he's smart and good and just about omniscient. He even knows his Judas. His great opponent, Henry VIII, is vain and childish, and everyone else is weak, stupid, cowardly, corrupt. Moore is the only man of honor in this movie, and he's got all the good lines. He actually doesn't have all the good lines. Bolt's Moore is the kind of hero we used to read about in the biographies of great men written for 12-year-olds, the one against the many. Perhaps people think A Man for All Seasons is so great because, unlike the usual movie, which is aimed at 12-year-olds, it's aimed at 12-year-old intellectuals and idealists. As if they've grown into compromising and unprincipled people, they can hail A Man for All Seasons as a masterpiece. Heroism so remote, so totally the property of a superhuman figure, absolves them of human weakness. It becomes romantic. Well, you know, there was another famous man who stood almost alone against the whole world, and his name was Jesus Christ. One gets the impression that Pauline Kael finds the very notion of conscience or heroism as risible or perhaps even pathetic. That why would anyone be upset about this sort of thing? Well, one suspects that she rather admires Richard Rich. Richard Rich learned what the game was and played the game very well. He ended up as Lord Chancellor, a very rich man. There is a lot of thematic unity in this film. I'm particularly delighted. There is an attempt to suborn Thomas More. He doesn't realize it at first. He is given a cup, like a religious vessel. It's made of silver and very expensive, and apparently is from the good woman of Leicester. And it's only when he is almost home that he looks at the bottom of the cup and he realizes who the cup is actually from and that it is a bribe. And he throws it in the Thames, and the boatman, horrified, retrieves it. And so Moore decides to give it to Richard Rich, and he explains to him that this was a bribe. And Rich takes the cup, and what are you going to do with it? Well, I'm going to sell it and buy a decent cloak. Then later we see him on his road to fame and fortune wearing a decent cloak. And then near the end of the film, we see him kitted out rather fabulously. Yes. Fame at least means decent clothing. But no, a woman such as Pauline Kael, from the great struggles of human history, the great struggles of human conscience, of morality, mean nothing. Well, one really wouldn't expect much from her in films which treat this. Here is Thomas More in this film explaining to his daughter his position. He says, "Listen, Meg, God made the angels to show him splendor as he made animals for innocence and plants for their simplicity. But man he made to serve him wittily in the tangle of his mind. If he suffers us to come to such a case that there is no escaping, then we may stand to our tackle as best we can, and yes, Meg, then we can clamor like champions if we have the spittle for it. But it's God's part, not our own, to bring ourselves to such a pass. Our natural business lies in escaping. If I can take the oath, I will." And here is, the charge that made by Kael, that Thomas More is too good to be true, when his daughter begs him to submit for his own life, and by extension, the lives of his family. This is how he explains himself to his daughter. "If we lived in a state where virtue was profitable, common sense would make us saintly. But since we see that abhorrence, anger, pride, and stupidity commonly profit far beyond chastity, modesty, justice, and thought, perhaps we must stand fast a little, even at the risk of being heroes." There is a sobriquet that is used for movies like this, sort of a catch-all insult, Oscar bait. Well, as I recall, it was rather shocking that A Man for All Seasons won as many Oscars as it did. This is a lavish production, despite the little amount. It didn't cost much money because the actors agreed to not to take very much money for it. It looks good. The script is tremendous. There is no striving for effect in this movie. I found it tremendously moving, and it has my highest recommendation. Let's see, a final look at the chat. Oscar Toe says, "I also enjoyed Moore's interactions with his wife in this. It felt very real." LOL says, "I knew Kevin would mention her." Who is that? Hurt praised Schofield very highly for that Wales line reading. It has an interesting ending, thought-provoking, says Anne Run. Who was it that I mentioned? Susanna York. Hurt was in a horror movie called Ryan O'Neal called Partners. quiz show was terrific, says Half Galician. Has anyone else here seen The Hit? I've seen it. Hurt is great in it, as is Terrence Stamp. Tim Roth is also quite good. Elephant Man, another great glib. Hurt performance is glib medley. Yes, David Bowie did the Elephant Man on Broadway, and no makeup. You know, there's a limit to what you can do with facial expressions. I mean, if you see what David Lynch's Elephant Man, then you understand just how grotesquely hideous this poor fellow was. And, oh, yes, people were, too cruel to him. Well, you have to understand how, again, grotesquely hideous he was. Anyone says, I was going to watch it on Amazon, but got rid of my Prime membership. Oh, that's one of those. If you wait a sufficient period, then you get another, 30-day free offer. I like Schofield as Mark Van Doren in Quiz Show, says Anrun. We can thank Henry for the Archbishop of Canterbury, says Chokokin 666. Burton was good in a number of other things, but Kevin's mind is just closed on him. Well, I rather grew up on Richard Burton, and it seemed to me I was explained that this is what acting is. And no, I'm just not getting it. Okay. King Henry gave me a new saying, says Oscar Toe. I will not brook. That's per John Candy as Orson Welles would win. Yes. You ever seen the SCD parody? The Man Who Would Be King of the Popes? It's sort of a mashup of this movie and of Beckett. And there may be another one. I want to be king, king, king. I want to be pope, pope, pope. And then what? Dave, what's his name? As Richard Harris. I want to be king of the popes. I'm not getting the voice right, but it's one of the very funniest things that I've ever seen. Star Rover says, Man for All Seasons gave an acquittance in prison for refusing to go to Vietnam the strength to resist giving in and agreeing to go. After 2 years, he was given a dishonorable discharge and released. Shaw is a badass, says Chokokin 666. Yeah, he is, actually. And it's a real shame that, as I say, he decided to drink himself to death and died at such an early age. I mean, his range was absolutely tremendous. Look at the character that he played in the taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. This is a man who has purged himself of all emotions entirely. While he's waiting for the city of New York to resist or to come up, meet his demands, he's doing a crossword puzzle. It's just, just keep him busy. Not a worry in the world. It's great stuff. Anyway, so Oscar Toe says, King Henry is so boisterous and a man for all seasons, and his change from being jocular to terrifying is a sight to behold. Indeed it is. Indeed it is. And that scene, in the garden, when he comes to visit Moore. And, of course, Henry VIII was a very intelligent and energetic man. He did write music of high standard, and he was something of a classical scholar. But, yes, here I am meeting my old friend, Thomas More, and we're going to sit outside together, and the force of my personality is going to persuade him that he should no longer resist me. And Moore makes it clear, just as gently as he can, that this is cutting no ice with him. And Shaw goes almost immediately from about 25 miles an hour to 70. It's very impressive. Okay, so what's on the book club tomorrow? American Pilgrim by Roosh. On Theater Thursday next week, I am discussing a documentary by Kent Jones from 6 years ago called Hitchcock Truffaut, in which Francois Truffaut interrogates Hitchcock on the making of his films. June 24th, Kenji Mizoguchi's Ugetsu I'm the aforementioned Billy Wilder's 1964 film Kiss Me Stupid on July the 1st, and Sean Baker's The Florida Project on July the 8th. You can tell it's after 6 o'clock. I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to contribute a donation to my live stream, which, well, I really, to be honest, desperately need right now, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to this live stream may be made directly via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.